Hello there, my freshmen, and welcome to a new week. Let's pray, and we'll get right into our little mini lesson today. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for the snow on the ground. I know it's just now starting near me right now, but I pray that you are just keeping us warm and safe in the midst of more winter weather. We do pray, God, that you continue to show us signs that spring is coming, and we pray, God, that you are renewing our hope every single day too. We love you, Jesus. We thank you for who you are. We pray this all in your name. Amen. So our objective for today, just one, continuing to write well-structured paragraphs. It's that same exact paragraphing assignment I showed you in our last lesson at the end of last week. We'll look at that again in just a moment here. Right now you're watching our Just Mercy Reading Part 2 video. Again, Part 1 was last week. So if you have not listened to the first half of Just Mercy Chapter 10, you'll want to go back into our last lesson folder or go into YouTube and watch that, because I will be picking up where I left off in that video. You'll also want to take some time today to at least work on your Just Mercy writing assignment a little bit. Once again, we'll look at that in just a moment, just as a little refresher. Today is also one of our last couple days to catch up on earlier missing work before I send grade reports in a couple of evenings here. So if you are behind on work, I highly recommend you spend some time catching up today. Tomorrow will be your last day for catching up before I send grade reports. Speaking of tomorrow, in our next lesson, I do have a new set of vocabulary words for us there, but I'm also going to build in some more time for us to continue writing our Just Mercy paragraphs and, of course, working on missing work. Let's take a look at that paragraph first, and then we'll read Part 2, second half of Just Mercy, Chapter 10. And here we are. So Just Mercy, Chapter 10 discussion right here, little paragraph writing assignment for you. We looked at this in our last lesson, but just as a refresher before we look at the second half of this text. As you read Chapter 10 of the text, please identify one social issue Bryan Stevenson encountered in this story. So far, we've seen a couple. We've seen an example of racial prejudice with his interaction with the prison guard. Obviously, the chapter focuses on issues with mental health in the criminal justice system, and we'll see that even more in this upcoming half right here. We've also seen other issues, too. We've seen issues with bad representation in court for poor people. We're going to see an issue today with how the foster care system works. There's a lot of different issues that pop up in this chapter. I'm just asking you to identify one that you'd like to write about here. As you write about it, I want you to explain how Bryan Stevenson dealt with this issue in this chapter, as well as what kind of the end result of that dealing was. Not saying that he completely solved that issue in this chapter. We kind of talk about how things shake out in the end. If you'd like, if you want to go a different route with your writing, you could choose to focus on what can be done to work on this problem in our society today. Again, it depends on what social issue you identify from this text. Another little reminder here, and the reason why I'm giving you all week to work on this assignment, says, in addition, you must also comment on one or more of your classmates' posts. Really no length limit on your comment, just a couple of complete sentences is totally fine. Even one sentence is fine. Your comment should be constructive and respectful. It means that you're bringing the conversation further. You can agree, disagree, compliment, make a further observation, ask a clarifying question, etc. Obviously, be respectful in your tone. Again, grading this out of 15 points, same thing as our last paragraph, plus the additional 5 points for commenting on a classmate's post. If you have written yours already, I highly recommend you check back just to see what your classmates have said, so you can get commenting as well. Once again, this is not due until the end of the week, so you can always keep checking back on this discussion to see where your conversations are going. That being said, let's hop into this text, Just Mercy Reading Part 2. And I've got the text for you right here. I'm just going to click View to open it in a new tab. And you can see our full text right here. I'm going to find the exact spot where we left off, so give me just a moment. I'll give you a page number so you can pick up as well. We're just going to read this through the end, and then you have the rest of your time today to work on missing work or continue working on your paragraph assignment for this chapter. And I found it right here. We left off on page 196, if you're following along with me here. I also recommend, once again, if you have not watched the first half of this video, this second half is not going to make sense. Go back and watch the first half so that you are ready for this reading here with me. We pick up with Jenkins was a short African-American man. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. Avery Jenkins was a short African-American man with close-cropped hair. He grasped my hand with both of his and smiled broadly as he sat down. He seemed unusually happy to see me. Mr. Jenkins, my name is Bryan Stevenson. I'm the attorney you spoke. Did you bring me a chocolate milkshake? He spoke quickly. I'm sorry, what did you say? He kept grinning. Did you bring me a chocolate milkshake? I want a chocolate milkshake. The trip, the Confederate truck, the harassment from the guard, and now a request for a milkshake? This was becoming a bizarre day. I didn't hide my impatience. No, Mr. Jenkins, I didn't bring you a chocolate milkshake. I'm an attorney. I'm here to help you with your case, to try to get you a new trial, okay? That's why I'm here. Now, I need to ask you some questions and try to understand what's going on. I saw the grin fade quickly from the man's face. I started asking questions and he gave single-word answers, sometimes just grunting out a yes or a no. I realized that he was still thinking about his milkshake. My time with the officer had made me forget how impaired this man might be. I stopped the interview and leaned forward. Mr. Jenkins, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize you wanted me to bring you a chocolate milkshake. If I'd have known that, I would absolutely have tried. I promise that the next time I come, if they let me bring you in a chocolate milkshake, I'll definitely do it, okay? With that, his smile returned and his mood brightened. His prison records revealed that he often experienced psychotic episodes in which he would scream for hours. He was generally kind and gentle in our meeting, but he was clearly ill. I couldn't understand why his trial records made no reference to mental illness, but after the George Daniel case, nothing surprised me. A little reference from last time, the George Daniel case was the case before. The big issue with that case, and another possible issue you can write about here, is medical fraud. The issue with the George Daniel case was a doctor who had zero medical qualifications claimed up and down that George Daniel was not insane, and because of that, they could not plead insanity in his defense. He ended up going to prison for years before they could prove in court that he is actually crazy. When I returned to my office, we began a deeper investigation into Mr. Jenkins' background. What we found was heartbreaking. His father had been murdered before he was born, and his mother had died of a drug overdose when he was a year old. He'd been in foster care since he was 2 years old. His time in foster care had been horrific. He had been in 19 different foster homes before he turned 8. He began showing signs of intellectual disability at an early age. He had cognitive impairments that suggested some organic brain damage and behavioral problems that suggested schizophrenia and other serious mental illness. Just some backgrounds about these illnesses right here. Intellectual disability and cognitive impairment they are newer, more correct terms for what used to be known as mental retardation. It's also possible that he simply had just special needs, educational needs that were never met in the past. Schizophrenia is a mental disorder where you oftentimes hallucinate or you hear things that aren't there. It's a disorder that psychologists still don't understand a whole lot about, but it is a serious mental illness. When he was 10, Avery lived with abusive foster parents. Whose rigid rules kept him in constant turmoil. He couldn't comply with all of the requirements imposed on him, so he was frequently locked in a closet, denied food, and subjected to beatings and other physical abuse. When his behavior didn't improve, his foster mother decided to get rid of him. She took him out into the woods, tied him to a tree, and left him there. He was found in very poor health by hunters 3 days later. After recovering from serious medical problems relating to his abandonment, he was turned over to the authorities, who placed him back into foster care. So notice that right there. Obviously, domestic abuse and foster care abuse is a big issue here too. By the time he was 13, he had started abusing drugs and alcohol. By 15, he was having seizures and experiencing psychotic episodes. At 17, he was deemed incapable of management and was left homeless. Avery was in and out of jail until he turned 20, when in the midst of a psychotic episode, he wandered into a strange house, thinking he was being attacked by demons. That's a pretty common side effect of schizophrenia. In the house, he brutally stabbed to death a man he believed to be a demon. His lawyers did no investigation of Mr. Jenkins' history prior to trial, and he was quickly convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Just like the George Daniel case, this is another case that should be easier in court. Clearly, Mr. Jenkins murdered a man, but he should not necessarily go to prison for life or have the death penalty, because this man is clearly insane. The prison would not let me bring Mr. Jenkins a milkshake. I tried to explain this to him, but at the start of every visit, he'd ask me if I'd brought one. I'd tell him that I would keep trying. I had to, just to get him to focus on anything else. Months later, we were finally scheduled to go to court with the evidence about his profound mental illness, material that should have been presented at trial. We contended that his attorneys had failed to provide effective assistance of counsel at trial when they didn't uncover Avery's history or present his disabilities as relevant to his criminal culpability and sentence. When I got to the court where the hearing would take place, about a 3-hour drive from the prison, I went to see Avery in the court's basement holding cell. After going through my usual protocol about the milkshake, I tried to get him to understand what would happen in court. I was concerned that seeing some of the witnesses, people who had dealt with him when he was in foster care, might upset him. The testimony the experts would provide would also be very direct in characterizing his disabilities and illness. I wanted him to understand why we were doing that. He was pleasant and agreeable, as always. When I went upstairs to the courtroom, I spotted the correctional officer who had given me such a hard time when I had first met Avery. I haven't seen the officer since that initial ugly encounter. I had asked another client about the guard and was told that he had a bad reputation and usually worked the late shift. Most people tried to steer clear of him. He must have been the officer assigned to transport Avery to the hearing, which made me worried about how Avery might have been treated on the trip, but he had seemed his usual self. Over the next 3 days, we presented our evidence about Avery's background. The experts who spoke about Avery's disabilities were terrific. They weren't partial or biased, just very persuasive in detailing how organic brain damage, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder can conspire to create severe mental impairment. They explained that the psychosis and other serious mental health problems that burdened Mr. Jenkins could lead to dangerous behavior, but this behavior was a manifestation of serious illness, not a reflection of his character. Notice the difference between this case and the George Daniel case. Clearly, they had experts this time who did not have any sort of bias or prejudice against Mr. Avery. We also put forth evidence about the foster care system and how it had failed Avery. Several of the foster parents with whom Avery had been placed were later convicted of sexual abuse and criminal mismanagement of foster children. We discussed how Avery had been passed from one unhappy situation to the next until he was drug addicted and homeless. Several former foster parents admitted to being very frustrated by Avery because they weren't equipped to deal with his serious mental health problems. I argued to the judge that not taking Avery's mental health issues into consideration at trial was as cruel as saying to someone who has lost his legs, "You must climb these stairs with no assistance, and if you don't, you're just lazy." Or to say to someone who is blind, "You should just get across this busy interstate highway unaided, or you're just cowardly." There are hundreds of ways we accommodate physical disabilities, or at least understand them. We get angry when people fail to recognize the need for thoughtful and compassionate assistance when it comes to the physically disabled. But because mental disabilities aren't visible in the same way, we tend to be dismissive of the needs of the disabled and quick to judge their deficits and failures. Brutally murdering someone would, of course, require the state to hold that person accountable and to protect the public. But to completely disregard a person's disability would be unfair in evaluating what degree of culpability to assign and what sentence to impose. That paragraph, I know there's a lot of fancy words in there. The paragraph's basically saying, look, even though Avery Jenkins definitely did murder someone, there are different ways to hold people accountable than sentencing them to death or throwing them into jail for the rest of their lives. Another way to do that for those who have mental disabilities is to get them into the correct sort of treatment and rehabilitation centers. Not only to help them heal, but also to protect the public from other dangerous behaviors. I went back home feeling very good about the hearing, but the truth was, a state post-conviction hearing rarely resulted in a favorable ruling. If relief was to come, it would most likely be on appeal. I wasn't expecting any miracle rulings. About a month after the hearing, before judgment was rendered, I decided to go to the prison and see Avery. We hadn't had much time to talk after the hearing, and I wanted to make sure he was okay. Throughout most of the hearing, he had sat pleasantly, but when some of his former foster parents had come into the court, I could see him become upset. I thought a post-hearing visit would be helpful. When I pulled into the parking lot, I once again saw that loathsome truck with its flags, stickers, and menacing gun rack. I feared another encounter with the guard. Sure enough, after checking in with the warden's secretary and heading down toward the visitation room, I saw him approaching me. I braced myself, prepping for the encounter, and then something surprising happened. "Hello, Mr. Stevenson, how are you?" the guard asked. He sounded earnest and sincere. I was skeptical. "Well, I'm fine. How are you?" He was looking at me differently from how he had before. He wasn't glaring and seemed genuinely to want to interact. I decided to play along. "Look, I'll step into the bathroom and get ready for your search." "Oh, Mr. Stevenson, you don't have to worry about that," he quickly replied. "I know you're okay." Everything about his tone and demeanor was different. Told you guys in our last lesson that this chapter has a positive ending. Here's how it went down. "Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll go back and sign the book then." "Mr. Stevenson, you don't have to do that. I saw you coming and signed your name in for you. I've taken care of it." I realized that he actually looked nervous. I was confused by the shift in his attitude. I thanked him and walked to the visitation room door with the officer following behind me. He turned to unlock the padlock so that I could go inside. As I started to walk past him to enter, he placed his hand on my shoulder. "Hey, I'd like to tell you something." I wasn't sure where he was going with this. "You know, I took old Avery to court for his hearing, and was down there with y'all for those 3 days, and oh, well, I want you to know that I was listening." He removed his hand from my shoulder and looked past me, as if staring at something behind me. "You know, well, I appreciate what you're doing. I really do. It was kind of difficult for me to be in that courtroom to hear what y'all was talking about. I came up in foster care, you know. I came up in foster care, too." His face softened. "Man, I didn't think anybody had it as bad as me. They moved me around like I wasn't wanted nowhere. I had it pretty rough. But listening to what you was saying about Avery made me realize that there were other people who had it as bad as I did. I guess even worse. I mean, brought back a lot of memories sitting in that courtroom." He reached into his pocket to pull out a handkerchief to wipe the perspiration that had formed on his brow. I noticed for the first time that he had a Confederate flag tattooed on his arm. "You know, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think it's good what you're doing. I got so angry coming up that there were plenty of times when I really wanted to hurt somebody just because I was angry. I made it to 18, joined the military, and you know, I've been okay. But sitting in that courtroom brought back memories. I think I realized how I'm still kind of angry." I smiled. He continued. "That expert doctor you put up said that some of the damage that's done to kids in these abusive homes is permanent. That kind of made me worry. You think that's true?" "Oh, I think we can always do better," I told him. "The bad things that happen to us don't define us. It's just important sometimes that people understand where we're coming from." We were both speaking softly to one another. Another officer walked by and stared at us. I went on. "You know, I really appreciate you saying to me what you just said. It means a lot. I really mean that. Sometimes I forget how we all need mitigation at some point. Remember that vocab word mitigate? It's important here." He looked at me and smiled. "You kept talking about mitigation in that court." I said to myself, what the hell is wrong with him? Why does he keep talking about mitigation like that? When I got home, I looked it up. I wasn't sure what you meant at first, but now I do. I laughed. Sometimes I get going in court, and I'm not sure I know what I'm saying either. "Well, I think you done good, real good." He looked me in the eye before he extended his hand. We shook hands, and I started down the door again. I was just about inside when he grabbed my arm again. "Oh, wait, I gotta tell you something else. Listen, I did something I probably wasn't supposed to do, but I want you to know about it. On the trip back down here after court on that last day, well, I know how Avery is, you know. Well, anyway, I just want you to know that I took an exit off the interstate on the way back, and well, I took him to a Wendy's, and I bought him a chocolate milkshake." I stared at him incredulously, and he broke into a chuckle. Then he locked me inside the room. I was so stunned by what the officer said, I didn't hear the other officer bring Avery into the room. When I realized Avery was already in the room, I turned and greeted him. When he didn't say anything, I was a little alarmed. "Are you okay?" "Yes, sir, I'm fine. Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, Avery, I'm really doing well." I waited for our ritual to begin. When he didn't say anything, I figured I'd just play my part. "Look, I tried to bring you a chocolate milkshake, but they wouldn't." Avery cut me off. "Oh, I got a milkshake. I'm okay now." As I began discussing the hearing, he grinned. We talked for an hour before I had to see another client. Avery never asked me again for a chocolate milkshake. We won a new trial for him and ultimately got him off death row and into a facility where he could receive mental health treatment. I never saw the officer again. Someone told me he quit not long after that last time I saw him. This paragraph is one of the happiest paragraphs in all of Just Mercy right here. We see victory for Avery right there. They won him a new trial and they represented evidence in court. He's saved him from death row, one of the 125 plus people saved by Equal Justice Initiative, and into a mental health facility where he can truly heal. And on top of that, the officer right there, clearly he goes off on a bit of a healing path as well, just based on what he witnessed in that courtroom. What I love about this chapter so much is just this idea that that there are second chances, and it's not just second chances within the justice system itself. It's also second chances and a chance to heal for those who grow into prejudice as well, just like that prison guard was. Once again, I want you to identify one issue from this chapter. It could be racial prejudice. It could be mental health in the justice system. It could be foster care. It could be really any of the issues that you noticed in the first half of this chapter as well. I just want you to write a paragraph about it according to those directions. You do have all week to write your paragraph and comment on a classmate's paragraph.